Hi everyone, Dr. Courtney Smalley here, your recruiter, workforce development instructor, and your personalized career coach. So in today's conversation, I'm going to give you all my top 5 favorite things to do in an interview. So essentially, my favorite interview techniques. Now, whenever I am offered an interview for a job that I might be applying to, I always do these 5 things, and so far they have landed me every single job that I have applied to. So this is going to be more or less an insider scoop on some of my favorite techniques and tips to nail your next interview. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. So again, today's conversation is going to focus on my personal 5 favorite interview techniques that are hopefully going to help you all land your next job if you are offered an interview between now and in the near future. The very first thing is researching your interview panel. Now, in today's climate, there are several employers that may use Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx, many different platforms for you to understand who's going to be on your interview panel. And because they will likely list the emails of those representatives, you can easily discover what their first and or last names are going to be. So as a recruiter myself, when I am typically, interviewing, or if I am on an interview panel for a position at my current employer, I always try to get a sense of who that person is. So, like many folks, once you see their first and last name, you might go to your web browser and really discover or see what you can find about that person. Recruiters do that, but as job seekers, you have the ability to do the same. Once you have an idea of who's going to be on your interview panel, here's where you can tailor your answers based off what those folks might want to talk about. So I've been on interview panels where folks have mentioned my alma mater. They've mentioned things that I would find interesting, and it lets me know that they did a lot of research ahead of time to prepare for their interview with my organization or with the panel that I was sitting on. So again, this is a relatively quick thing that you can do, perhaps right when that invitation is sent over to you, or you could do it the night before. Again, there's going to be no foul play in the event that you were to research your interview panel. Many of us have a digital footprint, and by utilizing the resources that we already have, you can be more prepared for those folks once you meet them the very next day on that interview that you're going to have with that company. The second interview technique, which is one of my personal favorite, is writing your questions down. So let's say if you have a virtual interview or maybe even an interview in person, you're often allowed to bring in a portfolio, perhaps a notepad, something like this, where you can jot down a couple of notes. Every time someone asks me a question when I'm in an interview, the first thing that I do is write down the key words of that question. There is nothing wrong with you taking your time to understand the questions that they're asking of you. There's also nothing wrong, too, to actually pause when they ask you the question. Oftentimes, I have sat on interviews where I will ask a candidate a question, and immediately they have an answer for me. Perhaps you might think that that person isn't listening, or they might already have an answer already loaded up that they're ready to share. But I have found some of my best responses from candidates are from those who hear the question, they listen, they pause, and then they respond. There's never a reason to rush the interview process. Again, we want to learn a little bit more about you as the candidate. So once those questions come your way, there's nothing wrong with you using a notepad to write down those notes, so that way you can be more prepared for that question. Every single interview that I have sat on, I always bring a piece of paper, notepad, notebook, what have you, to write down those questions, circle the keywords, and answer it the way that the interview panel wants me to focus on, so that way I can be more precise and more brief with the answer that I'm going to provide to that interview panel. The third thing that I do in my interviews that I think is going to be extremely important for you all is really just establishing eye contact. Now, as a recruiter, I feel very comfortable looking folks directly in the eye, but let's say if you have a panel interview and there's 5 people in the room, I make sure that I give everyone the same amount of eye contact. So I'm looking at this person, here in the center, here and here, as I answer my question. I will say it's something that you have to get a little more practice with. So if you have a virtual interview, I always recommend that you all look directly in the camera, so that way they know that you're prepared, you're rehearsed, and you also know that you are really the best person for the job. You can demonstrate your confidence really just by giving them some extraordinary eye contact. Now, again, like I mentioned in the previous answer, if someone is asking me a question, I may look down to, again, write a couple of keywords and pause. Then I will look up at the person who provided the question and make sure that I address the entire room with my eye contact, so that way they feel included within the answer. Now we're going to move to the fourth technique that I use in all the interviews that I've been a part of. It's using the entire time. Okay. Now, I might make an entire workshop about this later because I don't want to put the entire response here in this video. But as job seekers, you can use the entire time. Oftentimes, a job interview might be roughly 1 hour. If it is going to be 1 hour, that interview committee is going to prepare questions that's going to eat up roughly 30 to 40 minutes. And then it's your turn as the job seeker to ask them any questions that you have about the position, about the company, about the responsibilities of that role. That is your time to shine. Interviewing is a two-way street. So they're going to be asking you questions, and it's also your job to ask them questions. I have seen candidates in the interview by saying, I have no questions. That is always a red flag because it appears as though you're not interested. Perhaps you don't have enough investment, or maybe you just don't care. I always recommend that job seekers ask at least 2 to 3 questions at the end of the interview portion, so that way the committee knows that you have interest and you care and you want to learn a little bit more about the job that you are applying to. Now, it is quite common for the interview panel to answer your questions swiftly because they probably have already, received the same questions in the event they've had perhaps 3 or 5 other interviews. But if they do answer that question within 2 to 3 minutes, check this out. You still have, let's say, 12 to 15 minutes of time left of your 1 hour interview. Utilize every single minute. Now, you do have to be careful. If it's, let's say, your interview is from 4 to 5 and it's now approaching 4:55, I probably wouldn't ask one more question because that's going to eat up a lot of the time. And most interview panels or most interview etiquette will say, well, hey, Courtney, thank you for, expressing interest in this position. Our team is going to go back to debrief and discuss your candidacy for the role. If we decide you are a great match, we'll reach back out to you. So they're usually going to call, in the interview. That might take about 2 to 3 minutes. But I would say if it's 4:50 and you still have 10 minutes, ask them one more question because you want to make sure that you use every single time. I always tell candidates that, the interview that they provided you, they're already interested in you. They just want to learn a little bit more about who you are and essentially the desires and also the curiosity behind why you apply to that position. So be confident, give them that eye contact, and make sure you use your entire time because you earned it. All right, everyone. So now we're at my final favorite interview technique, and it's actually quite simple. It's providing the interview committee or perhaps the person who you interviewed with a physical thank you letter. Now, it might be, again, a little more old school. I know typically there are a lot of candidates who will provide perhaps a thank you email, but it will never compare to the feeling of a physical thank you letter card. You can go to many different stores to purchase these cards, and by doing that, it shows that you went that extra mile to showcase your candidacy. And it tells me too that you took the time to drive to that establishment to drop off that letter. Now, I understand if you all are, interviewing for a position, perhaps it may be in a different city or a different state. You may or may not have the resources to drop off a physical letter, but in the event that you can, it will always leave a great impression on that team. I have received several thank you letters, and I can probably remember every single candidate that has written me one. And when I have applied to jobs, I also do the same thing. So in the event you are granted an interview, and if you are, I would say, roughly adjacent or close to that establishment that you're applying to, there's nothing wrong with a digital email that says thank you for the opportunity to interview, but providing them with that physical thank you letter will never lose style. And I promise you that you will leave a great impression on that interview team. All right, everyone. So that completes our conversation today about my personal 5 favorite interview techniques. Whether it's researching the panel, giving eye contact, writing the questions down, using the entire time, or even providing that thank you letter, it's going to set you apart from the competition. Now, again, the interview panel, they roughly might be doing 3 to 5 or sometimes 5 to 7 interviews for their listed vacancy. And by using these 5 techniques, you may have exactly what you need to not just impress these individuals, but they're going to see that you went that extra mile to showcase your candidacy. And don't be surprised if they call you back and offer you that job. You can tell them Dr. Smalley sent you. So everyone, that completes our conversation today. If you would like to learn a little bit more about interview techniques, perhaps networking, salary negotiation, make sure you provide a comment below so that way I can make my next video about that topic. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.